This week on the BackTable podcast.
The future really isn't written here. I think that it's really important to become a member in the Academy and participate in the survey. So much great work is being done by them. And putting that aside, we describe the truth of our workforce by having more and more robust data. And we do this by having you as a member, so let your voice be heard. To that point also, there's a small subset of us working on this right now, right, to describe our workforce realities, but this affects all of us. Your input and ideas are just as valuable, so always feel free to reach out to me or any other task force member with your thoughts or questions and ideas. We have the best people, and we're certainly happy, given that, to field your advice and opinions at any time.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the BackTable ENT podcast. We're a podcast that focuses on all things otolaryngology, and we've got a really great show for you today. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Ashley Agan. I'll be your host today, and I'm lucky to be joined by the lovely Gopi Shah this morning. Good morning, Gopi.
Good morning, Ash. I'm lucky to be across from you this morning. I'm super excited for our topic and our guest today. I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know our guests always love to hear us, loving on each other when we get to podcast together.
It's hard not to.
Oh, there they go again. We are both lucky enough to be joined this morning by Dr. Andrew Tompkins, and he is an otolaryngologist practicing at Ohio ENT and Allergy Physicians in Columbus, Ohio. He has an extensive experience working with the American Academy of Otolaryngology, serving on the Board of Governors, and serving on several committees, including the socioeconomic and grassroots and patient safety and quality improvement committees, the wellness task force, and now chairing the workforce on socioeconomic task force. He was also recently elected to an at-large director position for private practice. He is here to talk to us today about the workforce in ENT. Welcome to the show, AJ.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me and for the work you're doing.
Thanks for coming on. Can you first tell us a little bit, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Sure. So I did my residency here and my training at Ohio State here in Columbus, and met my wife here. After training, I was in the United States Navy, and I served there for 8 years, and I practiced general ENT in 3 different locations along the East Coast, and I was lucky enough to have several leadership opportunities, and I was able to simultaneously get my business degree during that time. But we had started our family, and we wanted to settle down. And so coming back to a place that we love and with family roots was an easy decision. So I was lucky enough to join Ohio ENT and Allergy back in 2019. We're a great group of private practice physicians. We've got 20 ENTs, 7 allergists, 3 oral pathologists, and 1 neuro-ophthalmologist with more physicians on the way.
Very cool. Oral pathology. Nice.
Yeah. It's a great addition.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Our topic today is the workforce in ENT, and I have a confession because when Jean Brown told me to reach out to you and talk about the workforce, I don't think that I recognized what a provocative topic that this is, and it wasn't until I kind of got into it and looked at some of the editorials and talks that you've given that I kind of was like, oh, I get it. So this is interesting, and there's some questions here that we don't know the answers to that we need to talk about more, and that is relevant to all of us. So
if we're confessing things, I'll have to say it wasn't until Ashley sent me the Oasis talk that you gave, AJ, and you start out with the story of the physician. It's a fictional, I assume, fictional story, but it could be all of us, any of us. Yeah. That, go through school and undergraduate and, medical school and residency and, this fellowship. And then we're out into practice, and it's not exactly what we're thinking. And then a patient comes in that needs care that now we're a little far out of our residency, or a little potentially specialized, and we can't provide. So my confession was sort of, I didn't really ever kind of think of it that way. And after that talk, I was like, oh, wow. This is super interesting. There's a whole different perspective, something I didn't even think about. So yeah, there's my confession as well.
Well, thanks for looking at those things.
So what got you interested? How did you become interested and involved in, the workforce and socioeconomic task force? Where did this come from?
So, kind of like you said, it hit me too. It dates back to probably around 2016. when we had our last concerted effort to understand our workforce. There was a triological thesis that got put out around then by Dr. Charles Hughes, and Drs. Kennedy and Pillsbury were on that, but they had written about this for a while, as had many others. And I'd really spent some time looking at those articles, and it hit me too, the magnitude of this topic and the consequences of getting our workforce right or wrong. And I wrote on some of our challenges back then, but as I said before, we had a growing family. I started a new job, we had another new baby, and COVID, of course. So my focus was a bit elsewhere for a time, but I started poking around, and this sort of ultimately formed some of the genesis for that OASIS talk, but I started poking around a bit in our training and supply data back in 2021. And I had some serious concerns about our supply construct, fellowship training, geographic dispersion, and what had been happening with some of the other specialties like emergency medicine, for example. And so I started writing up, it became a 3-part series in ENT Today. And I will say that, none of this happens without other people getting involved and helping. I had sent some of this preliminary write-up I was doing to people like Dr. Jim Danini, who's our Academy CEO, Dr. Gene Brown, who you mentioned, who you had on, who allowed me to speak at that OASIS conference, and Dr. Sarah Bowe, who I think you also had on, and who was a co-resident with me, and who gave me some editorial ideas and some ideas of where these thoughts might find a home. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my wife, who when you get into this, you really dive in with both feet, both arms, everything, and it really takes a lot of work. And she saw this passion that I had, and we've got 3 young boys at home, which is a task in and of itself. But she was like, "Hey, you love it, go for it." And I think the beauty of this topic is that it really affects everybody, and everyone has a voice in this and has an interest implicitly or explicitly in getting this right. So I think there's a lot of underlying interest in looking at this again and understanding who we are and where are we going with all this. And it was really under the leadership of Dr. Danini and Dr. Yatagasawa at the Academy that the Workforce Task Force was born. And I'll never forget, one of the most memorable texts I got was from Dr. Brown. He shot me a text that, basically it was a slide showing me the task force and that it had been formed, and I was chairing it. And I was like, "Oh, be careful what you wish for."
Congratulations.
But in all seriousness, that's where the hard work got started. And we have a great team, and it deserves mentioning across the spectrum of our specialty. Doctors Rhonda Alexander, Tiffany Chen, Andrew Coughlin, Doug Ray, Cecilia Schmalbach, David Yen. And this year we added a resident on our team, Dr. Ben Ostrander. The Academy members put a lot of work into this behind the scenes as well. Dr. Jim Danini, of course, Maura Farrell, Tina Maggio, Jackie Cole, and Jacob Vanthe. It's been a real privilege to take this journey with all of them so far.
Yeah, I was surprised at how much work you had to put into just to get your data, just to get the numbers. Because I think on the surface, it's like, oh yeah, you should be able to look up how many ENTs are in practice. Like that should be a number that some data, we fill out so much paperwork. There's so many registries. I was like, wow, it sounds like that you did a lot of work just kind of trying to make sure that you're getting accurate numbers for, how many ENTs are in practice.
Yeah. If you're talking about that Ohio project that we did, it's interesting you say that. I'm happy you recognize that, because that was a lot of work. We looked at 5 different databases, and we went through every single one, every single person. And to a person, we researched if they were practicing. We called around. We really were diligent about trying to understand that. And it's interesting, if you just took it, what it spoke to is that, and I hope we'll get to this later, we can't just trust things on face value. You really have to dig in order to find the truth. And the truth is what matters. And that's what's going to derive good decision making. And yes, it does take a lot of work. Same thing on the resident side of things, knowing the numbers and the number of graduating residents.
So AJ, can you can we back up for a second and tell us what exactly, when this task force came to fruition, what exactly was the goal? What is the purpose, and sort of what have you guys slowly found along the way? Just to kind of set the context.
That's helpful. So I think that, your question's great. So why study this? And I think other people might have different ideas about the purpose, but I'll talk about what I think is the purpose. That one of the most important features of a well-functioning physician workforce is that we have patient access. So do we have it? What does that mean to have access? And do we have it in all locations? Is that man who you spoke about, who I spoke about at the OASIS conference, who's got cancer and he's 4 or 4.5 hours away from the nearest cancer center, is he going to do well? The sad truth is that all our research and advancement of our specialty doesn't matter for that guy if he doesn't have good access. And this is where the gravity of this topic really hit me, that millions of lives and quality of life really hang in the balance here. And it's not just on the patient side. What if we have, as you stated, and as I said in the OASIS conference, what if we have too many people going to fellowships? And what if, those skill sets aren't fully utilized? What about the skill sets they gave up? And getting even earlier in the process, do the people deciding on our specialty really know what the job really looks like? And do those people pursuing fellowships and our field, do they know what the skill set utilization is? I think a lot of the answers to these questions were no. And this is about maximizing, in my opinion, human capital on our patient side so we can help them the most, and us so we can all live more healthy and productive lives. But you do so through being truthful and transparent with the information pertinent to all aspects of our workforce. So we can all make more informed decisions, make better, to tackle different opportunities and identify access opportunities. So if you think about it more broadly, I see the purpose as more of a large quality improvement initiative. And, in terms of things that we've learned, I highlighted this before, but we need our own specialty and subspecialty specific data. I mentioned our team. It really does take a team. This took a lot of effort across multiple fronts, and we come at this from different angles and different perspectives. We create better questions and better information and the truth when we come at this from different angles. Speaking to that data piece again, it takes diligence and digging to really, and I think it starts with a healthy dose of skepticism to really know the truth. And once you know that, it's very rewarding, but it takes a lot of time to get there. You need to dig. And despite all the digging and effort and being careful about this, getting advice from other people who came before us doing this, we're still going to make mistakes. You're still going to hit some snags and find out some questions were kind of a dud or you could have asked them better, but you need to come right back at it. And I will say lastly, and if you listen to that OASIS conference talk, I talked about some metrics that I think are really important to look at. And unfortunately, we found pretty early on, you can't answer those easily in a simple physician survey.
In terms of the data, in that talk you mentioned, do we look at the AMA data? Is it the board that has the data of, where we are? Is it accreditation bodies? What have you guys found with, in terms of the data? And is this something ultimately that the society takes on for itself? Like, how do you sort of manage that, figure out what the data is, and then keep it going? Like, who's responsible?
Yeah, well, in terms of the data, we need to take ownership of that. If you look at the workforce numbers section in the 2022 report, which I'm sure we'll talk about, it was to highlight basically that you can't take any given database on face value. The truth is going to be wildly different from what you think might be accurate, and it'll be different depending on what database you look at. So if you want accurate numbers, you really need to combine databases and do sampling to understand, the workforce numbers and where people are. So I think we need to take, and all this goes for all specialties and even subspecialties, as I think hopefully we'll talk about. Subspecialties as well need to get their own data. It's not good enough to know, how many ENTs we have. That's, in my opinion, meaningless. As I said, access is the most important thing. We need to get away from this metric about, how many otolaryngologists we have per 100,000 population. This metric falls short, and we need to really be tackling other things. If you, like I said, in, that talk and the ENT data articles, the input factors for supply and demand all change over time. And so that number is meaningless. We need to look at where these factors all meet, and that's time. It's wait time. And that's what we should be focused on. But as a clear and objective and meaningful and comparable as that is, it's hard to get that. it's really hard to get that. And we can't rely upon the AMA or someone else as good a work as they do with some things. We can't rely upon them to get that information for us. We need to get that. But you can't answer some of those things on a simple physician survey. Like how many of us really know our third next new patient available slot, right? And when do you ask it? Do we ask it during the wrong season, given the seasonality of some of our jobs? So, that's what we should be tackling, but it's not easy to get. If you've seen the recent White Journal article, that the Dutch are doing this, they're looking at this. They're doing it for head and neck cancer, and so good for them. So it can be done, but we need to, we're starting off with this again, and so we just need to, keep at it and do this for ourselves and get that information. And I would also say regarding access, the second part is time. It is not just time, but distance. What if I can see tomorrow, right? But I'm 4 hours away. Is that helpful? And so distance is also another thing that we need to be looking at as well. And we just need to keep digging. And we try to tackle this also in our study, the 2022 report. Again, speaking to that concept that we just need to take our own ownership of this, is that we try to track the competence piece. When a patient comes to see you, what competence are you bringing to them? Our training is great. This is not anything against our training. Our training is fantastic. But people do fellowships and people give up areas altogether, or even as a generalist, you might choose to focus on very specific areas. And so the question is, when a patient comes to see you, are they going to actually get what they need? And, I think understanding improving these items really comes first from understanding it. And no one else is going to do that for us. We have to do that for ourselves.
Yeah. There's so much there to unpack and so many challenges. Even with a general ENT who hasn't done a fellowship, I think there's so many different blueprints for that these days. Like people, are based on different incentives or market forces at play. People, decide that they're not going to do XYZ or anymore. I really want to focus on a more sinus practice, or I really am interested in sleep surgery. And the more you kind of put your flag up saying, this is really my area of expertise, the other skills can kind of fall away if you go years and years without doing them. And then the other big challenge for the task force. So the task force lives within the academy, right? And the task force is going to be charged with trying to have the cleanest, best data so that we can make decisions based on the data. But the task force doesn't have the power to make changes on, the people coming up through, right? And so talk a little bit about just the background of that part of it, of how you have kind of these multiple organizations that do maybe have some control over to how to control the flow of people through the system. And how are those organizations going to work together?
And is there an incentive?
Yeah, I think that's it. That is it right there. Is there an incentive, and are they even tasked with having ownership of that? That was one of the first things that concerned me. If you think about emergency medicine, highly sought after specialty, rising numbers, and nobody is taking any accountability of the workforce and what's happening. I say to people, if you were in emergency medicine who by reasonable information is about to hit an oversupply situation, if you wanted to start a new residency and you could justify that, then ACGME is going to approve it. Everyone is in their silos, and the ACGME explicitly does not take workforce considerations into account. Nobody does. Everyone is incentivized to, start their own residency, have their own fellows, and that's fine. Everyone's going to operate based on their incentives, but you need some counterbalance to that. And that's the reason the academy plays such an important role, as can other subspecialty societies, in responding to that and providing feedback to the system, which is that, it doesn't have that feedback mechanism. And when we can supply transparent and robust information in that regard, individuals can make informed decisions. There's no one who's going to control the workforce. Some people might have ideas about what the workforce should look like. And I have my ideas about, what the optimal way of taking care of people and where, what the trade-offs might be. But I'm not going to determine that. The like I said, the market is going to determine that. But the market doesn't make good decisions if incentives are running amok and if there's not transparent information. Our subspecialty societies, I think, would be wise to do the same thing, to provide feedback, because as we become increasingly fellowship trained, what we describe as the general ENT workforce may not be relevant. And, to their credit, and hopefully we can get into this, but ASPO took up this torch this year. We're partnering with them to do a section of our subspecialty focus in our 2023 report. And I think others would be wise to do this as well. I want everyone to think about this. When I was in high school in the 1990s, the percentage of high school students who smoked any cigarette in the last 30 days was in the mid to upper 30s. What do you two think that rate is right now?
Cigarettes in the United States among high school.
High school
and
students.
E-cigarette.
Yeah, just smoking tobacco, cigarettes. I smoked any cigarette in the last 30 days.
Gosh, I want to say less, but I feel like that is wrong. 25%?
It's 1.9%.
Yeah.
And so we also have this highly effective HPV vaccine that's all but eliminated cervical cancer in young women in a recent UK study they did. So shouldn't this at least make us ask, like, if or when the current level of fellowship training in that capacity is going to be too much? This could take years, decades maybe, but all of our subspecialties have their idiosyncratic risks, and the consequences of ignoring these risks can be severe.
And so getting into the results of the 2022 workforce survey, can we talk a little bit about discoveries and, the kind of the trends that we're seeing, what you guys found?
Yeah, I mean, this was a culmination of years of learning from those who came before us and hundreds of hours of effort behind the scenes. So I wanted to personally thank everyone who participated in that survey. It's because of you and the efforts of the team who put it together that we can start to tell our story. And there was a lot in there, something for everyone, I think. It lives on the Academy website under the Business of Medicine tab. I'll talk first about fellowship training. We saw there's still a pretty significant interest among residents for fellowship pursuit. And what I found interesting was that the number one and for fellowships of interest, which was facial plastics and rhinology, those are the two that least mentioned among being needed in the community by practicing ENTs. We also started to look at, fellowship training and if fellowship trained people would still recommend their fellowship. And we looked at relative fellowship utilization data on a clinical percentage basis. But we came at this again this year from a different angle, which I think is going to be a bit more informative for trainees. We looked at supply perception, and it's not a direct measure of time or distance, but we were able to understand where people thought the supply was needed or if it was too much or just right. And I presume, at least this is what happened with me, I presume when people were making these selections, they based it on how hard is it to get in to see them or other specialists that they might refer to. But what does that mean, right? That it's hard to get in to see someone? Well, that typically means it took a while or they had to drive far. So we saw the biggest needs in the rural and non-academic hospital environments. And we were able to, on the fellowship side, we were able to map this out across all the different fellowships where the perceived fellowship need is. We saw practice type shifts, as you alluded to. We showed by age where practice environment shifting is appearing to happen. Now, this was a static assessment, but again, and we also probably oversampled academics because this was an academy survey. But all else equal, we see an academic trend among younger physicians, and this likely has been coinciding with the fellowship increase that we've seen. Now, the problem with that is it tends to abandon the rural patient from an access perspective, and we show that objectively. The private practice and non-academic hospitals tend to serve rural patients more, as do the non-fellowship trained physicians. On the flip side, there may be a reverse situation of urban poor access improving on the more urban or academic side, but we didn't really study that or could understand that from our survey. We looked at jobs and productivity, and a lot of different points I'd make there. We saw a tendency for men to stay at their job longer and for women to have more jobs along their careers and more dynamism there. We saw productivity differences across practice types and different perceptions of how that translated into, how hard was the workday. And to that point also, we showed clinical hours worked by fellowship or not, and the types of fellowships. And well, who does that inform? That informs the person who's early in the training construct. And to this point, there's been no regular, robust feedback to that earlier point to inform good decision-making. And on the later side, on the private practice side, we saw the intrusion, if you will, of private equity and hospital ownership and what that might look like in the near future. Something I didn't initially appreciate was the advocacy piece that can come from this. We saw a lot of different practice burdens across different practice types. We saw a lot of pain points here. I read every single response to the survey when we let people just ad lib it and just give whatever response they want. There's some painful things going on out there. And we saw a lot of push factors, having people retire early. And we don't want this. If we're going to be creating access and we want more time in the workforce and better use of that human capital and better quality of life, we want those things to be addressed. And we can now translate that into advocacy, which our academy does a great job of doing. I'm proud to say on the income side of things, we now have the most robust income benchmarking our specialty has ever had. And we showed this across gender, practice types. We showed ancillary income, how often somebody had ancillary income and what those were. And we showed what factors made someone a high incomer with or without ancillary income. We controlled for 22 items on a multivariate analysis when we did that. And something else that surprised me was on the retirement side. When you look at that 2016 study I talked about, the AMA attrition rate was assumed to be 1.7%. But what we saw was that there's a bolus of people who have an intention to retire in the next 1 to 2 years that in total was about north of 9% of the people sampled. This was a much larger number than I expected. And that's not sustainable by any means, of course, but when you take that together with some of the supply perception data, it likely justifies the increases that we're seeing in the trainee side of things, at least for the time being. And what's also notable is that the current practicing physicians, they don't have an intention to stay in the workforce as long. They seem to have an intention to retire like a few years earlier than those who had actually retired. And to the extent that's true and happens, we're going to see less total time in the workforce. Again, what does that mean? All else equal, patients are going to have to wait longer. And that might necessitate an increased supply. And there's a lot more there. I don't want to get into everything, but something for everyone, I think. Some really good benchmarking and really informs, I think, those in the early decision-making process more, in my opinion.
So AJ, can you explain to me about, a lot of this is what you're seeing as current data. Are you then making like projected data information? And then how do events like COVID come into play? Because, for example, you're going to have to remind me that I think you said it was the AMA 2016 attrition rate of 1%.
Yeah, the 2016 study quoted an AMA attrition rate of 1.7% of physicians in the workforce.
Which is pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, right.
How do things, these unexpected types of, when the pandemic hit? So how do you kind of, balance the current data, projected data, and then, for these sort of unexpected events that can take place?
So we have to respect that the unexpected events still describe the truth, right? COVID still truthfully disrupted things and created, some wacky statistics. But the answer to that is to keep coming at it, to describe it again, to keep coming at these questions, ask them differently, ask them again, but maybe a few years later. And so this comes from regular and robust information tracking and transparency. What we had relied upon before was very sporadic, intermittent journal articles on things that was not comprehensive, but was very niche and focused in some areas. And what if, and a lot of those, by the way, use the AMA numbers for their supply data. So what if something's wrong? Like a narrative might persist for years and without any counterbalance to it, or another study coming out saying, no, it could happen years later, at which point hundreds of people have made decisions and considerations based on this. So we really need, the answer is to keep coming at it. Just describe the truth, but describe it again. And over time, you're going to see a story play out. And in terms of projections, we don't, this again, we're early in the process. This is the first year to do something like that. Really is a large academic exercise in some respects. And I hope we'll get into this more in the 2023 report, and I mentioned ASPO, we are now able to do some projections for them. So that was very rewarding, very interesting.
And is the plan to just continue to do this annually, and so that we can see trends like over time?
At present time, I've not been told anything otherwise. So I'm just head down, just keep charging, just keep going. And, because I understand, and I think we all do, the ramifications of all of this, of getting it right or wrong. And if you just spend a couple minutes just thinking about it and what might happen if you get it right or wrong, there's a lot there. And I don't think that you can give up on that. I think we need to just keep tackling it.
Was the 2022 response rate? Like what percentage of otolaryngologists are you able to sample with the survey?
I would estimate that we had, this is where it gets into estimates of, how much of the academy versus the total workforce. The total workforce, we don't quite know yet. But again, I don't think there's as much relevance there as knowing the time and distance piece. But the response rate, I think, was over 15%. We had 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 actively practicing physicians who responded. We had, I think, 70 or so residents, and we improved on that significantly this year, on the resident piece at least, and we really made that a focus. So it was fairly robust, but again, we come at this by we describe the truth by just sampling again, and then you can understand the truth.
And you're in the middle of kind of looking at at the 2023 data.
Yeah.
And so, any sneak peeks from that, or when do we get to see that?
So we are. Most of the data tables are done. We're still in discussions about other things that we might want to see teased out. I'm really excited to have this one released. We made a much more concerted effort, like I said, to get better resident responses. And we try to understand their priorities, and that pertains to job choice and location choice, income and time off expectations. And nobody saw that who were actively practicing physicians, because we answered the survey. If you clicked that you were an actively practicing physician, it took you to a whole different set of questions. So you didn't really know what we were asking the residents. And so then on the practice side, we tried to understand recruitment more and how hard that was and ways to improve it, starting income, et cetera. So putting these data side by side, I think should inform both parties to allow for a more efficient transition, if you will. I mentioned before, we came at fellowship utilization again. We asked for this from a different angle. Instead of asking about fellowship skill set use, we asked about what skill set or what percentage of your clinical job could be accomplished from skill sets derived just from residency training. And I didn't trust that the prior data told us the full truth. And we got very different answers this time. Again, this is why you have to just go at it again, ask different questions. And we asked about subspecialty area abandonment among generalists and subspecialists, so we can see where there might be opportunities in that market. We went into a lot more detail about APP utilization, training, procedures done, how many patients they're seeing, so productivity components there. And we came at income benchmarking again. Like we just said, things are not static. Income's not static. All practice environments have different successes and vulnerabilities, which change across time. I'm sure COVID affected that to some degree. So here we are, just describing the truth again. And again, we had a ton of responses, great response rate this time. As I said, we partnered with ASPO this year, giving a talk there on all this for them specifically, but that allowed us to now get a comprehensive list of every pediatric otolaryngologist fellow ever trained. We have their practice locations, actively practicing or not, and we can provide some workforce projections, something in the early to medium term on that. So some really exciting stuff. I don't know when this podcast is going to be released, compared to when the report's going to be released. So I don't want to give too much away, but those were some of the, bigger points we're looking at. But I think some of it will surprise us.
There's a lot of variables when it comes to what you're looking at, and it's all so dynamic, right? Because you have, practice settings, hospital systems, different patient care needs, geography, partners in ENT, including our APP, partners. And it's interesting because you probably, just as you said, we have to keep doing this regularly. We kind of ask them the same questions, but different questions. But then you're looking at the same variables that, or maybe adding different ones because things are constantly changing, right? So how do you kind of make sure every year that you're not missing anything, or what to include or change, or, how do you keep up with it?
So we go back and look at things that we thought could maybe be better and ask better. And if we need to just come right at it again, we really need to look at that again, we come at it right away. We have a meeting about this, or a couple meetings about what are the modules, if you will, about what are the larger topics we think need to get focused on, and where we need to put feelers out to try to see if there's more there. So it comes from a team approach, a lot of perspectives on this, and there's certainly some editing of all this that happens, but we try to aim for a survey that can be completed in 10 to 15 minutes. Beyond that, it gets pretty onerous, and the response rates are going to really trail off, and you're not going to get as many people responding to the later questions. So we really, that's part of it too. And so we have historical knowledge about the questions we've asked before, and so we can look back at these things and in the modules, and so that's how we do it. And we get feedback from people, so that's helpful too.
Yeah, the length of the survey. I mean, that's really tough because there's so many things that you're like, and it would be great to ask this and ask this. But when I put on my survey taker hat, I get real fatigued. So
right.
I recognize, if it starts to get long, you're going to lose people, and then you're not going to have that data. Are you also looking at, and have you seen any trends with more non-traditional practice types, or people who might be, for example, doing locums as a full-time gig, or doing non-traditional practice models, or things like that, where it's kind of it doesn't fit into the academic hospital employment, private practice?
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate about the categorization there, because we could be in private practice, but we might be training residents. So what does that make us? And so we try to be clear in our designations of these things, but it's not perfect. And when we ask this, we do have an other where people can fill out whatever they want. And we found that a lot of those things just really ended up belonging in certain categories that were already described. And there were a couple that stood out, but it wasn't robust. The number was not significant enough to start describing it. Again, we need a lot of numbers to really start describing the truth. And we needed at least 10 or so responses to segment things out and describe things in different graphs. And even that's maybe not enough. So we really need a lot in each category. If we're going to describe a category, we really need to get a lot of responses, and we can't just take it from one response. So we asked about locums in 2022 and 2023. So 2022 was more, did you do any locums work? And then what practice environment did you come from? Like, were you in private practice doing it, or otherwise, or academia and doing it? This time we asked, we asked the locum questions again, but we asked about, where are you doing it? So where is the need for locums out there? And we had some suspicions, but this year we showed it. So there's not a lot of people doing locums, but it's an important group that's filling in a need.
Is that kind of the need that's in more rural areas?
So we didn't slice and dice that by, we didn't ask the specific location and zip code to be able to do a RUCA code analysis on that. But we asked the practice environment in which they're doing it. And it tended certainly to be more non-academic hospitals, which tended to have more need anyway. If you look at the supply perception, they had the most need. They had the most underserved areas that were a bit more rural, and also they had the most supply need perception. Like, hey, we need more otolaryngologists here. And so that just makes sense that it would be them as the ones that receive the locums work. So it made sense, but we were able to show it.
The survey gives us the more information about our workforce. And where do you get the information about access and wait times? And because the goal is to kind of match things up, right? And to be able to have a robust workforce that's able to take care of our population. And so how do you get the data on that side of it so we can kind of put these together?
It's a tough thing. I think that's best done through an Ascent partnership. They're the administrative organization for ENT. Now, they're going to know the data. If you ask them, like, they'll be able to go into their data and sample that. But even talking to them about this, it's not easy. Again, they ask the same questions, like, okay, well, when do we do it? What location? Like, we have 5 offices. Which office should we do it for, Should we just do an average? So it's not easy, but I would love, if I had my full control of the situation, I think that we would just put that out there on our websites and whatnot for patients to see. That's an access quality point that patients care about, where they can discern where they want to go just by seeing what the access is, not having to call around and seeing where they can get in. I think that would be a nice, transparent thing for us to all get to. And it's a bit harder when we don't have like a single system, like maybe the NHS or what the Dutch might do and how they're able to get their data. But that's a tough question. It's not going to come from a physician survey. We're just not going to know it. I know my data pretty well, and I can't tell you that right now because it changes, and it's going to have to come from administrative help.
AJ, can you tell us a little bit about the Dutch survey and how they're looking at their workforce in ENT?
So I looked at just that one article, and they had just done some work on head and neck. And I think that the beauty of what they didn't just look at like one time. They looked at, what's the time to be seen? What's the time to treat? Like time from, okay, we see them to they're getting treatment. And those are things that we can actually define and say, okay, 2 weeks is too long. 3 weeks is too long. We can actually set a number, saying, everything's okay because we have 3 point whatever otolaryngologists per 100,000 population. That has no meaning to the guy who has to wait 5 weeks for head and neck cancer treatment, or the person who gets in 1 week. Like, what matters to them is time. And that's where you're going to see outcome variation and that in distance. So that's they're doing a good job of that. But a lot of this is kind of new, and we just need to start whittling away at it and just create new norms.
And how does we've had a lot of technology and advancements in medicine and healthcare. I think of the CF population, and I think of like immunomodulators. I did a lot of PD sinus, and so you saw a big shift in how you're treating sinus disease. I think of immunomodulators for polyps. You'd mentioned the HPV example. How do we keep that abreast of sort of those advancements and changes, and how we play a role in these clinical processes as these pathologies change as well with time? I don't think we're completely out of it, but our role changes.
Right, and technology is wonderful. It's afforded us great opportunities to do more within the head and neck, and it's probably helped fellowship training a bunch, and it's given patients more treatment options. I'm a bit of a pessimist here, where I think some of this technology, and you've mentioned a few right there, that are doing more to replace rather than just simply adding to our repertoire and aiding productivity. That's always been the party line, is technology just aids in productivity. We asked in this year's survey if biologics were reducing surgery that would otherwise be done by you, and the majority of those who prescribed them said yes. And so again, begs the question to what you and I both said about the HPV vaccine. What's that going to do to us? Or genetic treatment for hearing loss? These advancements are great. We all want them for us and our children, patients, but what it does necessitate is even just greater caution from a planning perspective. And that's where it gets into the fact that we all have, especially the subspecialties, we all have idiosyncratic risk that is more at risk with some of these disruptions. I spoke to my one of my colleagues in my group the other day. He had a very interesting quote. He's a generalist. He said, I've had 3 different careers across my careers. I was doing more P's, then I was doing more of this, and now I'm doing more otology. A generalist has that diversification to tack in different directions and respond to technological disruptions. But those who don't have that diversification, they're at more risk. And so we need to plan for those potential disruptions. We can't prevent them. We just have to plan.
And as we're kind of talking about, potentially having either too many otolaryngologists or maybe too many super specialized otolaryngologists, but then also, kind of this paradox of like, we also have, patients who live in rural areas where there's not access. Do you feel like do we have a numbers problem, or do we have a distribution problem? Like, do we need to incentivize more people to, move to rural America? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough piece. That's what I mentioned before. That's the tough policy part. No one's going to make anyone go anywhere. You can try to create incentives, and people have been doing this for decades. It's not like rural access just became a problem. This is a whole field in and of itself. And yes, I think that, our statements would be fairly robust, and the data is fairly robust in saying that, rural Americans are left behind, but they're not the only ones. I think that if you look at our numbers in the supply perception, it was interesting how a lot of the different practice environments, the admission that there's too many otolaryngologists in their area or too few in that area, say private practice or academia, et cetera, they almost mirrored each other. So our numbers may not be bad. It's just that they're not distributed. I mean, clearly, if they're saying in their specific area it's too much or too little, that's a geographic issue. And I think that naturally, if you're a subspecialist like we are, you're going to have a draw from areas, and they need to come to you. So there's got to be trade-offs, right? It's never going to be perfect where we have everyone saying, oh, we have the perfect number in my area, right? That's never going to happen. We don't have power to exert control in that regard. I think our numbers are okay, but I was worried about the number of people retiring. But we do have historic numbers of people graduating and coming into the workforce. My concern there is fellowship training and the urbanization of our practices. The people aren't going out as much into the communities to provide access competency where people need it.
Yeah, I struggle with that because I grew up in rural Texas. I'm a country girl. I always thought that I would go back out and live in the country and be the town doctor. But life changes, and then right. You're in residency, and then you're like you put down roots in the city you're in, and you're like, oh, I kind of I have a life here, and so it's really hard, even with medical students who are coming into medical school with a personal statement that says, I want to go to help with the problem with rural access. Like, I'm going to go work in underserved areas. As you go through training and your life evolves, and then you have a family, and then you have all these other competing forces that kind of drive that decision making of where you ultimately end up. And so that's where I think it gets so challenging to try to take our data and affect, make change. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'd like to definitely touch on that. I mean, transparency is only going to go so far, right? That's going to inform opportunities and allow people to make, I think, better decisions and more efficient decisions. But the piece that's left out is leadership. All right. Leadership is, when there's incentives or market forces that create gaps, I think leadership can overcome them. And I really want to focus on this because this is an overlooked but huge component of what can be disruptive and how our workforce can be improved. I had the great pleasure of sitting on a panel at the recent Academy meeting that Dr. Al-Maradi put together on whether we're doing the best by our trainees. And he put out a pre-meeting survey to students and residents if they feel comfortable freely expressing their preferred career wishes in the application process, and less than a quarter agreed. And they were also asked if the residency selection is geared towards academia, and about 90% agreed or strongly agreed. And while this was a small sample of, say, 50-something people, the audience said the exact same thing when they were polled. And so I'm concerned about how much of a role that this is playing in shaping fellowship and practice type decisions. And I'll never forget, to put a finer point on it, I'll never forget a story that Dr. Murati told us in one of our first meetings. And of course, he tells it better as a story, but he was meeting with a visiting student about their career aspirations. And they said enthusiastically, I want to go into academic medicine. And I'm not sure what prompted him to keep digging, but he asked again, what do you really want to do? And the students stopped and they thought and said, honestly, I want to be the best otolaryngologist in my hometown of Wyoming. And this story saddened me so much, because we've created this environment that invites performance over the truth and what's in someone's best interests. And I think of the hundreds of other interactions that and these performances that went unchecked. And so we need to respect all career pathways. And to that point, again, another information drop here. We're going to see in this year's report that there's significant interest that exists among residents to have private practice exposure that they're not getting. I think that there's a lot to be desired from our residency admission process. I think we're abandoning metrics when we should be adding them, and we should be analyzing that as an academic exercise. And I think we're going back rather than making advancements to that end. And we do a disservice to them and us and our patients when we don't explore what produces a good otolaryngologist. How can we best allow that human capital to thrive? And leadership is what can step up and provide a counterbalance to what is. And I'll try to be brief and wrap this up, but I'll give you two recent examples of things in my little sphere of knowledge. I was at a recent grand rounds at Ohio State, and Dr. Gray from Mass Eye was talking about objectively tracking surgical competency. And if that wasn't great enough as an idea, the chairman, Dr. Rocco, asked one of the best questions after. He said, did you look at applicant information pieces and see if there was any correlation between this and surgical skill set ascendancy? These are the things that we should be thinking and talking about. As a separate example, I've been told that at MUSC, the residents now have a private practice rotation. And good for Doctors Labadie and Brown who made that happen. That's fantastic. And that residency just became more attractive, in my opinion, as a result of their leadership. So who else is going to step up and change the way we do things? Who's going to be the leader and say, we need a clinic there. It may not be in the best financial interest of us, but guess what? We've got plenty of money rolling around. We're going to do this. Who's going to step up and do it? And I can't wait to see it, but I know we've got great people to do it.
No, I think that's a great point, because, in terms of leadership takes values, right? You have to know what's important, but to understand what's important, it takes constant reflection, whether it's as we think about constantly reflecting on ourselves as individuals versus our field, like within the scope of otolaryngology as a group as a surgical subspecialty. And so I think that hits the nail on the head there. I think that's super important, because then it also goes back to the first question or point that you make, which is, do we know what the job is really going to be like when we enter the field? And then there is that tension of, the sort of performance, the sort of academic, sort of how we, in academic, what we value or encourage in our applicants. And then the gap of, wait, what's actually the need once on our patient side, once, a person is done in their training, to having other, practice rotations and exposures to our trainees, so they know the breadth and depth and all the layers. I wanted to ask you, we've talked about training, and we've talked about the length of time somebody stays in their career. We've talked about people more and more now, especially women, changing practices. There's dynamic, like we are not a stagnant group of a field. Like medicine is very dynamic, and we'll probably have different practices, skill sets. How do we keep up with that in terms of when you're 5 to 10 years out, or when you're, 15 to 20, 30 years out, how do you keep up with whether it's clinical needs, surgical specialty training needs, patient population changes, et cetera? Like, how do we continue to develop ourselves?
Yeah, I think some of that naturally comes from just being, we've got the best people. I think we have the best people. I'll keep saying that again and again. So I think there's a natural inclination towards self-betterment and how do I do this better? And what are the other things that are coming online these days in our field that I need to be focusing on and learning about? Can't be mandated, of course, but the more we can put out there about what people are doing, and your podcast is a great example. You're putting people out there about how they're doing different things, and this informs people. The CME that they do informs people. In terms of retraining, if they need hard retraining, and this is where I think that private practice leadership could step up. If you think about where the buffers exist for retraining, so say you had abandoned a subspecialty area, but you really want to go back to it, or say you are disrupted by some technological advance. Where the buffer exists is not in academia. They're already training their residents. Where's the buffer? It's out of the private practice side and to some degree non-academic hospitals. So leadership there too will be able to create these programs potentially that I could theoretically envision where you can have people come in and get their skill sets back up. Again, this is about allowing human capital to thrive. And you don't want that person giving up on their career or allowing that smart, intelligent, caring person to not utilize skill sets that they want to use and did use in the past. So I think that there's opportunities there as well.
And you mentioned that you guys are working with ASPO. Are there any other societies or groups that you're engaging throughout the process with your task force? So
this is very recent. This was as of literally December, January, where all that work was done. It was hard charging, went at it pretty hard and got a lot of data, but they came to me to do a talk. And as a result of that, say, hey, this is a great opportunity. Let's try to make this more of a subspecialty focus. So to this point, it's very young in all this process. So it really, to this point, we've not necessarily reached out, and we're more than happy to invite others to talk to us. I think Dr. Gray had mentioned that the American Rhinological Society would be interested in this. So there's talk and conversation. Also, part of the goal of putting out something with ASPO was to show, hey, we can partner with you and we can help produce something that is going to be very revealing, and we can get it out quickly. Like, we want to make sure that the methods are robust and we're making sure it's accurate and that there's oversight there. But we can get this out in a different way that doesn't have to be we're not limited by a journal article submission guideline. Like, we can put out whatever tables and data and prose we want to do. And I think that's the advantage to this, is that the speed and robustness which we come at this. So we're more than happy to partner with anyone if you're interested in reaching out.
And do you know, are there other areas of medicine that have, embarked on this kind of same challenge, and have there been successes with that effort in kind of looking at the workforce and trying to create this, feedback?
Yeah, definitely. I'll give you two examples. One was urology. And when I started looking at all this pretty early on, I reached out to them immediately, and they've been awesome. They have been awesome at just giving us their time and help and giving us advice to avoid pain points. They've been doing this for like 7-8 years now. And if you go and look at their website, they do the same thing. They just put it out, PDF form, just here it is. We want as many people to see this as possible. Here's what we are. Here's what we look like. And here's where we're going. And so they're the gold standard. And we tried to live up to that. And I think we did in many respects. And in some cases, I think did a bit of a better job, I'll say. But and I think the gold standard to look at. There have been more robust efforts in other specialties. I'll name, for example, the emergency medicine folks. It was interesting. If you look at their match statistics, they were always like 98, 99, 99.5%. They were always super high match rate. And then they said they did a workforce analysis that came out, and it was before the match happened that following year, and their match rate just went poof, just tanked, because it said that all else equal, if we do nothing different, then we're going to have thousands of people by 2030 who are just not going to be able to find jobs. And that's shocking. We talk about human capital. What a waste of it if we have someone go through all this training and not live up to their potential. That is a waste. And what that did, that provided immediate feedback to the system to allow people to give second thoughts. Maybe they were on the edge and maybe said, maybe not. That's a bit too risky for me, and maybe I'll choose something else. But that's a good thing, in my opinion. That didn't alarm me. It alarmed everybody. I didn't alarm me. That was a good thing, because that was a reflection of transparent information, allowing people to make more efficient decisions for themselves. And that's not going to lead to as many people being out of work. So good on them. Keep doing it. But the weird truth to that is that on their soap match, all their spots filled basically. So people are still willing to take the risk, but it's I guess you need to just keep being honest and transparent about it.
Yeah, because then you don't need to have any sort of like mandate that, okay, you have to stop taking residents, or you can't grow your program this year. You just kind of like be transparent and let things play out. And
because no one has ownership to do that. No one is going to do, ACGME can't do that. They don't take workforce considerations into consideration. So they'd be the only body who come into the residency program and say, you're shut down, right? Or you can't take somebody. The academy's not going to come along, or ASPO's not going to come. No one's going to come along, but you can't take a fellow this year. So those things are unrealistic. We just have to recognize that conundrum, that supply construct problem, and that especially true for those of high demand, those specialties of high demand. And all we can do is just describe the data and say, hey, here it is, you make your decision, and go from there.
Well, as we start to round things out, AJ, any final pearls that you want to leave us with?
The future really isn't written here. It's not written yet. I think that it's really important to become a member in the academy and participate in the survey. It, again, is because of you all that we're able to understand this a bit better. And again, this next year. So much great work is being done by them. And putting that aside, we describe the truth of our workforce by having more and more robust data. And we do this by having you as a member. So let your voice be heard. And as much to that point also, there's a small subset of us working on this right now, right, to describe our workforce realities. But this affects all of us. Your input and ideas are just as valuable. So always feel free to reach out to me or any other task force member with your thoughts or questions and ideas. We have the best people, and we're certainly happy, given that, to field your advice and opinions at any time.
Thank you for all of the hard work that you all are doing, and for getting into the nitty-gritty of the data and trying to get it right. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
It's advocacy, and it's nice to see advocacy from the society standpoint. A lot of times we take a lot of what the different task force do for granted, especially for many of us like myself that don't know some of this nitty-gritty, and to kind of understand it better and see where there's true advocacy, whether it's patient access side to advocacy on behalf of us otolaryngologists in our field when it comes to retention, understanding expectations, and pushing our training programs to kind of go beyond the academic setting and get out into the community. I think it's pretty exciting.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTable ENT on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable ENT is hosted by Gopi Shah
and Ashley Agan.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter, Aaron Bowles, Nick Shellcross,
Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Taylor Spurgeon Hess.
Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
Administrative support provided by Jamila Kennebrew.
Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.